Hello friends, for today's video we're back with another from readers, and I'm sure most of you here know what this video series is, but if you're new, the idea is that I pose some kind of question related to publishing, to writing, to books in general, character types, and I ask my patrons as well as all of you on my community tab your thoughts on these topics. And for today we're doing two writers from readers, female main characters. We will do this exact same thing for male main characters, and so if you want to have a chance to contribute to the conversation, just check out the community tab as the day this goes up. I will have that new question posed over there, and then if you want to guarantee that your response gets read, I do always, as a thank you to my patrons for being so supportive, continuing to support me, I always try to get through all of their responses, but I will try to get through as many of the ones that I saw on the community tab as possible. If I don't get around to your response, it's either because I didn't get to see it, or because maybe what you articulated was similar to what someone else articulated, and so I want to get through as many concepts as possible and also prevent from just the same thing being said over and over again. And I just, as a general thank you, I can't do this video series if not for your contributions and your willingness to express your thoughts. So just right off the bat, thank you so much for engaging in those community tab posts, and I am really excited to jump into this one. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things to discuss. So all that said, Brandon says less female characters that have all of their accomplishments and skills on some kind of messed up, wow, it's so surprising she's just as good as men. Wow, what a wonder scale. From the wow, look how strong, she's got muscles like a man trope to the look how ruthless, that's not very ladylike, why she's as bad as men. All these stereotypes of physical strength being immediately associated with some kind of manly trait, and any empathy or nurturing qualities being feminine just needs to chill. I agree, and I did see a lot of other thoughts expressed that were similar to this, and so much of what I think we're seeing as trends in stories right now is a result of what we have been told. And I think talking about female main characters and male main characters is inevitably going to potentially touch on some topics that might make people feel like a little uncomfortable, or they might think like, oh man, I'm tired of seeing everybody on the internet trying to talk about what it means to be a man. And what is that new thing that you see for women, like a high quality woman? A high quality woman would do this, an elegant woman would do this. They wouldn't wear certain colors, or they wouldn't wear darker lip liner, and just like the dumbest things that apparently is like, this is how you are supposed to be a lady, and then this is how you're supposed to be a man. And what I think books do often, by the way, if some of you haven't seen those kinds of like that kind of video or those sorts of messages, I don't know if what I just said, if you're like, what does that have to do with anything? The point is that I think that we collectively have been told for so long, this is how men are supposed to be and this is how women are supposed to be. And instead of recognizing people are people, and that there are certain things that across the board, maybe one group is more likely to experience than another, and thus there might be some generalizations we can make. At the end of the day, people are individuals, and thus how we are treated should be based off of us as individuals, and we should see that in our stories as well. However, when we've been seeing generation after generation told what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man, and our books often are a reflection of society and often pushing back on those things, retaliating against those things, then you're going to see almost like the reverse. So as an example, and I'm coming through the lens of an American girl, so I recognize that there are different things that are instilled in people depending on where you live, but to just give you that little thing, I'm a lady who grew up in America in a really conservative religious section of the state I live in. So what I was always sort of seeing and hearing is that girls are, what Brandon is saying, girls are just more emotional and more nurturing. And where I grew up, given how religious it is, a lot of the girls, it was kind of guaranteed that after high school got married, pretty much right after high school, and that they started families right away. And so there's this idea that you need to be gentle and calm and learn to be motherly. You need to know how to cook. If you have any wants outside of those things, that's not feminine. That's kind of the message a lot of girls in the area I grew up in were told. And I know, while this isn't true for everyone, I know it was true for a fair amount of people, maybe not so much in your generation, depending on your age, but maybe a generation or two before you. So I think in books, we have seen characters that are going against that. We're pushing back against this idea of what the parameters are for femininity. And you have these characters that, instead of being individuals and maybe exhibiting some of those traits, because it's just how the character is, it's like they can't have any of those things because, look, women can be all these other things that men are. We can be just like men. Instead of saying women can be people, and here are all the different sections that we typically associate with girls or we typically associate with boys, that they have different facets to their personality, their motivations, and their traumas and things like that. Instead of piecing them together as a person, we start from how can I push back against what we've always been told. So I think that that's where that comes from. And while maybe it served its purpose for a while and can still serve its purpose, I think that publishing, I feel bad. I feel like everything always comes back around where I'm like, it's publishing's fault. But publishing has a tendency to see something that does well, because initially this would make sense that this would do well. It would be eye-opening. It would create empathy. It would make people realize, like, maybe I don't actually want to be like this. Maybe I've just always been told that this is how I'm supposed to be. While it might serve a purpose initially that is groundbreaking, after a while, publishing's like, that made money. People like that. And then they just look for more of that. And then they present the same thing to you over and over again. And sometimes those depictions of those types of characters fall really flat, and they start to become cliches. They're not nuanced whatsoever. The thing that initially pulled us to those kinds of characters, new generations don't have that same thing. So maybe it's dated. Not to say that it's not worthwhile, but that we have to keep moving forward. We can't just rely on what made money once upon a time, because then stories aren't really interesting anymore. And again, you're not actually exploring people as people. You are, ironically, still now pigeonholing what it means to be a woman or feminine when you say, well, if you want to be a strong female character, because I know that's a big thing a lot of you are frustrated by, what does this even mean? But in order to be that, you can't be any of those things that were typically associated with ladies. You have to be all these things typically associated with men. And yes, I'm just agreeing. I just spent probably at least 5 minutes. I was looking at how much time has passed. Probably at least 5 minutes just agreeing with you. Yes. Anyway, moving on. Damon. Exactly what so many people have already said. Women who are women. Strong women, tough women, gentle women, feminine women, moms, daughters, sisters, friends, actual friends, not just there to eventually shack up with, little girls, elderly gals. There are so many things women can be that have nothing to do with the stereotypes writers pigeonhole gals into. I don't want to read the story of a character who is a woman with the only definition of that word being she doesn't have, male parts. Holy crow. Is that a phrase, or did you have a typo? Is holy crow a phrase instead of holy cow? Anyway, holy crow, just stop. Women can be tough and feminine at the same time. They can be strong and still gentle. They can have emotions without being a crybaby damsel in distress who will only overcome the challenges in her life because some dude showed up. Ugh. I also completely agree with this. I know a lot of what I said is similar to what you just expressed, Damon. I do want to touch on the crybaby damsel, as that is still a character type, and it is sort of different from what I was just describing about the character who's always strong and masculine. I'm using air quotes for anybody that's watching and is listening but not watching. But anyway, so there is that character that's just like, oh my, I have to be rescued. She's just there to be kind of an insert so that people can imagine themselves being taken care of and swept off their feet by a fella. And I understand wish fulfillment's a thing in all genres. I know for a lot of what I'm talking about, it's pretty fantasy specific, but these things are true in other genres as well. But that character type can often be so empty when it's coming from a place of wish fulfillment. I think that there are a lot of, from just talking, to other generations of ladies, I'll use like family members as an example. they were expected to take care of the kids as if that wasn't a job in and of itself. That's just like a thing that comes naturally to them. They're expected to take care of all the kids. They're expected to do all the cooking, all the cleaning. Then you get to a point where you need a 2-income household. So now they have to also have a separate job unrelated to taking care of the kids. And so now they're working and they're supposed to take care of everything at the house. And so I think there's this idea of like, wouldn't it be nice if someone just came along and took care of everything for me? And I think that's where this empty damsel character can be really appealing. I'm going to tone down the air quotes because I feel like it's going to be the whole video of me doing this. But I think that's where that character type came to be potentially, and why it can be appealing sometimes. Just the wish fulfillment being just like, can somebody else take out the trash and like change the kid's diaper for me, please? That's sort of what it's like. And throw into the mix that a lot of times you see this character type, I would say, in romances, fantasy romances. So then there's the added element of, wait a second, you're telling me they're taking care of my emotional needs and physical needs? Sign me up. There's like certain people that I feel like they really would appreciate getting to imagine that, because they don't get it in their own life. And that's actually really sad and really tragic. And hopefully there are things in their life that can change in the future, and then their life won't be as difficult. I'm not saying that your life has to be in the box that I described in order for you to like those kinds of stories. Sometimes it's just fun to read a silly little adventure where somebody gets rescued, and we have our reasons why we gravitate toward them and enjoy them. However, to have these extremes of either I'm going to exhibit the traits that are stereotypically associated with men, thus I'm a strong lady, or I have nothing going for me and I'm completely helpless and I need somebody to come along and do everything for me. I just think it would be nice if we can continue to have more in between. I think we do. And I think publishing has, I know I was poking at them a little bit before, but I think publishing has really done a lot over the years of trying to find different kinds of stories, different kinds of characters. And I am really excited about that, as I feel like if I had asked this question, I don't know, 5 years ago even, I think that I would have maybe felt more like it was hard to find. I do feel like it's less difficult to find these days. So while I don't disagree, I completely agree that I'm tired of there being these extremes. I do think that there is nuance in books these days, which is good. Becky, stop it with the female characters who can't decide between 2 or more men as love interests. When you know, you know. I'm not saying I disagree with the idea that it feels like in so many stories we have to throw a love triangle into the equation. And sometimes what's annoying, and maybe this is what you were getting at, or maybe you were getting at real life, I'm not sure, but in stories, oftentimes it's pretty obvious who the end person is. What is the phrase? Like, it's escaping me. Whatever. But whoever the person is, that it's really obvious that that's the person. This other person is just kind of thrown into the story because the plot is suffering. There's not much of a plot, so we need to throw something in the mix to make it a little more exciting. I'm tired of that. As a reader, it is frustrating when you're like, I know this person isn't gonna matter in the long run, so why are we doing this? I don't know if I agree if this is what you're saying, that every person knows if they're dating and they're just kind of, or not even dating, sometimes just casually talking with people and they're interested in somebody and they're spending time with them, and there's somebody else they know and they're spending time with them. Maybe they don't know between those individuals, and so they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I suppose that could be what you're relating to, and you can be saying, oh no, you know, and maybe I would disagree with that if that's what you're getting at. But in a fictional setting, I do think that it's really frustrating when there is a couple that is clearly the couple and somebody else shows up. I'm actually going to use the example of Mistborn. Even though I love Mistborn, the Well of Ascension, was anybody ever like, is this actually going to be the person they end up with? No, everybody's like, obviously not. No. And it was so extreme that I used to think, that's not actually a love triangle, right? And then apparently, Words of Brandon, W.O.B., has said like, oh, it wasn't, he doesn't sound like that. But apparently it was supposed to kind of sort of be a potential love interest. And I'm like, is it though? Really? It doesn't feel like it at all. I don't want to say character names in case you haven't read. I don't want to spoil things. But anywho, I would not mind two things as a result of your comment. One, either there's a character, and this got touched on in the romance editions of this style video. There's a character, they meet somebody, they fall in love, they work through life together as partners, they get together, they continue to work through life together, and they persevere. They support each other, they sometimes bicker, but it's like a realistic relationship that builds throughout the story. I would like to see more of that. And I think it's also possible to see characters who meet somebody, they like them, but there are problems, and it doesn't work out. And that's okay, and then maybe they end up meeting someone else. That happens. That's also realistic. Wouldn't mind seeing that. And then I suppose there's a third option, which is just there's no love interests, and sometimes characters, what do you know, can exist and have interesting lives and have interesting plots, and maybe it has nothing to do with falling in love with somebody. Jamie says, I like the idea of a female character who doesn't have to focus on the fact that they are a woman unless it is relevant to the plot. Men don't usually have to focus on their gender for the story to work. This is a great point. I think that the nuance of unless it's relevant to the story is significant. There are certain fantasy worlds that are obviously reflections of our world in certain times. I think a good example of a character who it makes sense for them to think about their gender is in A Little Hatred in the Age of Madness series. If you know this character, you know why it's significant that they think, as a woman, I have to navigate the situation differently, otherwise people are going to immediately jump to this conclusion, and I have to work this much harder at establishing my reputation and fill in the blank, you can go on and on and on. That makes sense because you're looking at a woman who has a lot of business prowess, we'll call it, in a setting where women previously have not, and she has to learn how to navigate that situation because there's really never been somebody before her, and she does get judged based off of the fact that she is a woman. That makes sense. But there are instances where characters, there's literally no reason for the fact that they're a woman to come up, and then it does, and you're like, what? Especially because there are certain fantasy worlds where the idea of women being mistreated purely because they're women isn't actually a thing. And in those fantasy worlds, it comes out of nowhere when suddenly, I don't want to bash a certain series, but there was one book I read from a series, and I didn't continue on with the series, so maybe this changes, but it didn't feel like there was really sexism in this world until you needed it to further the character's development, and then for her to be shown as strong, it was always in opposition to sexism that felt as though it came up out of nowhere. And part of the reason I don't want to say the series is just because there's plenty of series that do this. And I think that if it's not established in the world, it doesn't really make any sense. What it ends up feeling like is that you can't imagine, the author meaning, like they can't imagine women being able to overcome anything except for sexism, so then they write sexism in places where it doesn't really make sense to their world. And that's unfortunate when that happens. And you don't usually see that, to Jamie's point. You don't really see that. You don't see men suddenly having to deal with problems that, like, a guy can't show his emotions in a world where nobody cares if you cry or something like that. You don't really see that as much of, like, how can we possibly show that Bob is strong? How about we show that he can have a vulnerable side and that's strength, and we'll have it. That's not really a thing. So, at least not from what I've seen. I don't see out of nowhere situations that maybe are more often applicable to men than women coming up out of nowhere in a way that doesn't make any sense. And you get what I'm saying. I probably don't need to elaborate. Jason says, I feel like it's come up on the romance thread, but I'm tired of seeing otherwise strong and capable female characters break down and be completely undone or submissive when dealing with a bad boy. They're using quotes. I'm not just out of nowhere using quotes this time. When dealing with the bad boy main characters or love interests. It's like, sure, she can ride or slay a dragon, but she can't put some jerk in his place. Come on. If I talked to my wife or generally acted like some of these male characters do, she'd punch me in the face, rightly so. I'd be sleeping on the couch instead of having fun that night, at the very least. In a day and age when we are correcting such behaviors, it really sends the wrong message to guys who read these books. I know we're not the target audience for a lot of these, but some of us do enjoy and read them too. I don't get it and always brings me out of the story. I really like, it's weird to say I like this comment because it's kind of about some pretty serious things. I'm trying to imagine why. I think this ties back to the idea of this character who can do everything but then suddenly becomes submissive. I think it's still in some ways related to that fantasy, we'll call it, of the woman that feels like she has to do everything. She has to do everything in her life, whether it be around the house, with kids, maybe not even with kids, but other family members. Things fall on them a lot. They have to really push at their career. They're dealing with maybe sexism in certain ways, so then they have to push back against that. They're just tired, basically. And so the idea of there being this guy that comes along that they can just be like, you know what? I'll just leave everything to him and he can be capable and you feel like I can rely on them. I think that's where this stems from. However, I don't know why it can't just be where the person is respectful and kind and maybe they have certain things that are a certain way, certain dynamics in intimate moments or in private. Maybe they have a certain dynamic that they enjoy, okay? But when it's like the guy is just awful, for what? I don't really know. I don't know what... I can't identify. This is what I'm trying to say. I like to usually try to dissect and pinpoint and find the origin of certain things, but I can't understand why this male character type that shows up in these situations and stories, why can't they just be friendly and their own kind of a person where they have depth and nuance and they have their own goals in life and they have nice reasons why they're attracted to the woman and they want to be there for her and support her and she wants to be there for them and they have their own hobbies. Like, why can't they just be their own well fleshed out character? Why is it that so often they are the bad boy? I'd love to turn that over to all of you. If you have your theories as to why that character can't just be a nice fella, a good guy. I'm trying not to use language that's like, you know, that we see so, like, what's that phrase, the like, nice guys finish last or whatever. I'm trying to avoid that. But I'm just saying, like, genuine, nice human beings, if we're talking about in this situation, a couple where there's a lady and a guy, why is he like that so often? I don't really know. Is it have to do with, like, certain characters that we saw growing up in certain shows and we were like, but what if I made him change? This is my theory as to where this maybe stems from. There is the idea of women that fix men, which I think a lot of us don't really like that in stories or in real life. But I think there's like this wish fulfillment almost that if you just, if you can rely on this guy, like if you submit and you trust to submit to his will, or whatever, that he will not only take care of everything for you, but he will also, it's like a warped version of the protector, where all that negativity and anger, like you somehow are the one person that he's soft toward, and he can direct all of that anger at other people who might be a threat to you or something. I don't know. I've never seen 50 Shades of Grey. I've never read the books, but I have watched people react to, and I'm pretty sure there's an element of that where he gets very protective of her in areas where other people are being awful to her, but then she submits to him in the bedroom and in all things, basically. I don't know. I haven't watched the movie, but that's what I've gathered. So maybe it's kind of like that. It's like, I changed him, but only with me. Therefore, I'm special. I don't know. I don't like it, though, just to be clear. Just because I'm trying to find the origin doesn't mean I love this trope or appreciate this trope. Sorry, I'm squirming around because my foot was tucked under me and it's falling asleep. And also, I kind of want to take my socks off. The Reading Stray wrote, please no, quote, male, female characters. Why can females only be strong if they act like men? Yeah, what is it even... We went over this, right? I think, anyway, that women and men are human beings. And I don't think there's as many differences between us as sometimes we see in stories. I know I'm distinguishing in these videos female and male characters. And by the way, I just feel gross every time I say female, just because I think of those weird videos where they're like, females, if you don't understand the female mind, and those weird, like, you have to understand females are always going to be way more, and I'm like, ugh. But I think in fictional, when we're having fictional discussions, we say female characters and male characters, and we know we're not, like, trying to degrade anybody anyway. So I think that I know that in distinguishing the two, maybe there is this contributing to this idea that we are so drastically different. The reason for distinguishing is just because I think there are certain things that pop up more often with one type than the other, and thus I wanted to ensure we got to discuss a lot of those things. And I think, as I said at the beginning, a lot of what we see in fiction is a reflection and a pushback against what we see in real life, which in real life, there are a lot of people who have certain experiences as a result of their gender. They get told different things, and they have certain expectations placed on them as a result of their gender. And again, you'll see that in fiction reflected. But yeah, I agree. I don't know. I guess it's just this idea. I think it's let's not tell everybody that girls have to be in this box, but on accident, we have now said to be strong, you have to go in this box that is typically associated with men. Dan, hi Dan, more female MCs who exist with a story and motive that's not wrapped up in or interrupted by a guy. It seems like some of the best written, most realistic female characters become one-dimensional, swooning idiots once hot guy enters the scene and suddenly their purpose becomes about him. Here's where I think this could be a really interesting story. If that is kind of the point. If the point is to show that there are some people, and you can reverse it, and it can be in a queer relationship, it can be a guy being this way with a woman, but I think it'd be really interesting if you dissected characters who otherwise are very strong, capable, they speak up for themselves, they speak up for other people. However, because of certain patterns, because of things that happened when they were growing up, when they have a partner, they acquiesce, they become mush, they don't stand up for themselves, and why that is, that would be a great story to explore. But when it's just because, well, the plot is now about hot guy, as you said, Dan, that's boring. I don't think that's interesting. It makes whoever the character is that we're following, in this case we're talking about a female character, it makes her seem stupid. When there's no additional, let's peel back the layers and ask the question of why. I will extend, if it happens in a first book, and then in future books we explore that, okay, maybe it feels irritating at first, but it's like there was a point. But if that's not the case, it's just one single book, and that character is just dumb as soon as a good-looking person shows up, then I start to dislike that character. I'm thirsty. I'm gonna take a sip. Josie has a really interesting comment. I'm so sorry if I pronounce this wrong, because I think this is a French word, and I looked at the pronunciation, and I'm like, oh, I'm probably gonna say it wrong. The ingenue. There is no limit to the number of words to describe how much I hate her. Firstly, if a female character is wholesome or naive, that can be fine if it's well written. However, they cannot be the main character without going through some sort of growth or change. 4 books into a fantasy series, that same female character simply cannot be naive anymore. Secondly, 9 times out of 10, the ingenue is used as a device for and by men to have a sexual and romantic target who has no feelings, thoughts, or opinions for themselves and will bow down to the more experienced male in the story. Thirdly and lastly, women are people. All women, whether they be young and innocent or old and worldly, have thoughts and desires. They want things out of life and want to make something of themselves. Even if what they want is to be a housewife, they still have opinions about that life and a desire to make it good and worthwhile. You captured so much of what I think we've already talked about, and I'll zero in on the naive character, as I think that's a slightly different avenue than some of the others that we've gone down. So the idea of there being this super naive character that stays naive, again, if that character, if there's like an intentional blocking of things right in front of them, and we explore why that is, why do they keep letting certain things go? Why do they act as though there's not a problem when there's clearly a problem? What is the source of that? What's the reason? If that's the intent, or one of the intents in a multi-layered, interesting story, if that's one of the points and one of the plots to explore, all right, let's go there. Let's explore. Why is this character like this? However, when they just stay naive, it feels as though there's this idea that basically women are stupid and that we aren't going to learn from what is transpiring around us, that we are not going to grow as individuals. And I think the problem is that some people don't know how to write a character grow without changing their personality. I think there can be that naive character. Let's give her a little bit more of a personality. Let's say she's naive, but she's very sweet, and she's really lovely and very docile. And okay, that's how that character is. They go through some things, their eyes are opened, and I think some individuals don't know how to write that character where they have changed. However, maybe they're still really sweet. Maybe they are still a little bit more timid, but they also are more aware of how the world works. I think some people have this impression that that character can only then turn into the cynical, mean character who's hardened by everything now. And you're like, you can still have characters who are inclined toward sweetness, who are inclined toward kindness. However, they also now are going to maybe notice when there are other people out there who might be predatory in nature, who might harm other people or them, and they have to learn how to navigate that while not sacrificing who they are as a person. That would be another interesting character to explore. But because there is this sort of, I think, limited view of how individuals change and grow but keep their general personalities, I think that we just decide to keep them the same. And that's unfortunate. But I don't know if I've seen that character type in too many modern fantasy stories. If you want to elaborate, Josie, on maybe if you want to give some examples of some books that you've seen that in. I'm trying to think of ones, but I don't know if I've come across that as of late. To me, that character sounds like a side character, or it sounds like a character that existed as a very vague, unimportant love interest in maybe older fantasy stories. But maybe it's just escaping me right now. Artemis says, I want to see female protagonists who are older than, say, 20. I'm getting older myself and would love to see myself reflected in the characters I'm reading. I love the MC in Nettle and Bone and am loving one of the main characters in Race the Sands. They are just in a different point in their lives, and I'd love to see more of that. Even Emily Wilde is closer to my age, and I like that. I don't know that I need to expand on this too much because I just can say I agree. I think that what it comes down to is we would like to see, because this came up in romances as well, we would just like to see human beings in all stages reflected in our stories. I'm so sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Zeynep, it's spelled Zeynep. Less female characters that are always clean and smell like spring sunshine, even if they should technically stink. Authors, please start to include gross stuff about women when they're traveling for weeks on end and they can't properly clean themselves, brush their teeth, all of that. I liked how R.F. Kuang did that with Rin. Rin is from the Poppy War, if you don't know. Especially if they're actively participating in a war. Let them be grimy and smelly and frustrated because of all of that. Also, I hate when authors make female characters fight, but barely sustain injuries long enough for it to make sense. Or it's never mentioned. One example of an author who actually did that well is Juliette Marillier in Dreamer's Pool. The main character has lost a tooth, she's been beaten, and ever since then, she's got one tooth missing. It's logical. Her tooth will not grow back. I liked that. Also, in a fantasy setting, I think people expect the main characters to be a certain way, usually conventionally attractive, and all of their teeth perfect and white. A female main character with one tooth missing is not what you'd picture. Side note, while I appreciate this detail about Dreamer's Pool, I don't think the book was amazing, lol, just a heads up. It was a nice read, but that's it. If you want to check out Juliette Marillier's works, you need to read her Seven Waters series, though. Do check for trigger warnings. I have not read any of that author's works, but I definitely really want to, so I'll have to keep in mind Seven Waters series. But I've heard good things in general. So I've not seen this movie. I think it's Mary Queen of Scots. It's got Margot Robbie, and it's where she's portraying a real person in history who was known to be in a position of power, but I think she had issues with her skin and thus would wear a lot of makeup, and a lot of people really praised the way in which they genuinely made her skin look as you would expect. She wasn't like, she just has a tiny little scar and suddenly she's hideous. It wasn't like that. However, she smiles and her teeth are gorgeous, perfect teeth, and you're like, that's okay, hold on though. You put all this effort into I get that the teeth weren't the focus, but also maybe make them look a little less perfect. And that's something I think is common in movies and TV shows because we can see it, so we think about it more. In books, if it's pretty fair and normal for everybody in this world to have kind of strange teeth, then they might not comment on it because for them it's not strange. It would be strange if their teeth were perfect and white. That could be an interesting thing, like, wow, they have great teeth. Sorry. I don't know how many of you have seen Love is Blind, but now I'm just thinking about Jimmy being like, you have really nice teeth. Like, no, I mean, like, they're, like, big and perfect and white. Like, you have nice teeth. The injuries component, I do think that's frustrating no matter what. And that's not always just applicable to female characters. That's just a thing that's annoying. I think we talked about this in another Two Writers from Readers. I think it was just a very general, like, please stop. And one of the things was stop giving characters injuries if they're going to be magically better with no literal magical intervention or healing done just all of a sudden. And I might have brought this up at the time, but I swear in Powder Mage, which has been years since I read it, and I'm so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I swear a character got shot and then was up and about the next day. I swear that happened. And if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. I don't think they were healed. I think it was just like, oh no, I got shot. And then the next day they're like, I'm coming with you. Injuries in general, yes, very much agree. It would be nice if characters' circumstances were reflected. I will say, sort of going back to A Little Hatred, there is a character who is a lady who experiences bleeding because that's a thing that people experience. What do you know? And that character, I guess people have complained about that being a thing that happens on page. There are reviews that are like, ugh, about it. And I think that's kind of weird because in that series, and like that's a grimdark series where bodily fluids are mentioned and talked about, and they're not hidden in any capacity. So to complain about that and not all the other times kind of just comes across a certain way. I just fed my dog Luna Bear, so if you hear noises, it's probably her eating her food or at some point inevitably drinking some water. But anyway, moving on. Taylor says, I think we need more female mentor-mentee relationships. We need more strong. Not sure if you can swear on YouTube, so insert strong if you can't, LOL. For the record, I could swear on YouTube. I just know some people listen with their kids around because they've grown accustomed to me not saying things that they're like, oh no, I can't listen to this with, little Susie here. So I just don't. But it's not a thing you can't do on YouTube. Anyway, we need more mentor-mentee relationships. We need more strong women teaching women to be awesome. It just seems like this is much less prevalent than the wise old man mentor figures. Probably due to the fact that sexism is still alive and well in a lot of fantasy worlds, leading our female MC being the one to break the chains, and therefore no elder women in positions of power. But this is getting old, especially in fantasy when the possibilities are endless. Why do we continue to just write these familiar old themes? It seems like we are still much more complacent in reading about women being oppressed than we are of the opposite. I really liked this because you're incorporating an element that I don't know if I saw too many other people mention, the whole idea of mentor-mentee and how, again, the concept of the origin, why is it that the old wise mentor tends to not be a woman, and the breaking down of these systems in fantasy, these systems of oppression, and how it's almost always against women. And I am not opposed to watching women break the chains, I think is how you put it. Yeah, break the chains. I'm not opposed to continuing to see that in stories, especially because so much of fantasy is still inspired by older time periods. And I think for a lot of people, they associate older time periods with women not being in positions of power as often, or if they are, they have a whole other list of things they have to deal with. Kind of, again, going back to that example of the character from Age of Madness. But I think another detail to what you're saying is, even if we're looking at a world that's like that, and I'll clarify, awesome if we look at worlds that aren't. That would be great too. It'd be unique, it'd be different, or at least it's less common, I should say. But let's say we are looking at a world where women are trying to gain more agency and they have more control over their lives. So even if that is the setting we're looking at, that doesn't mean that women before them have just sat around and been like, I'm fine with my place in life and I'm fine being oppressed. It's not like we go from generations and generations of people before being like, everything's fine the way it is, and then all of a sudden there's characters like, no, it's not, and then they push back against everything and break the glass ceiling. That's not how it works. There's almost always people pushing against, and those people, what's really sad is they don't get to see the fruits of their labor so often. Luna has now finished eating, so she's here. So she might walk past if you see a little white fluffy tail. A big white fluffy tail, because she's enormous. But anyway, so there's often so many times that there are women who, and no matter the case, not always women, but in systems of oppression, there are people pushing back, doing what they can, and they might have their own advice to those who come later. They might encourage them. They might teach them how to navigate certain situations, how to get by. They might introduce them to other people. And what you can explore a lot of things with that. You can have that character finally see, let's say the example is like they've never been able to vote. That's a probably dumb example, but now Luna went outside. She's probably going to the bathroom. I don't know why I'm giving you a play-by-play of like Luna's day. But anyway, let's say they've never had the ability to vote, and you finally, at the end of the series, that is accomplished. To have that old, she can be really old, and she can still remember pushing and fighting and never getting to see it, and maybe the main character's the one that really led the charge and it finally happened, and then they get to say, guess what? Grandma or great grandma or old lady that is my neighbor who I'm really close to, I don't know. They get to finally say, we can vote. And it ends, oh my gosh, can you imagine it ending with like going to vote together? Now I'm thinking about Nelson Mandela's memoir. Anyway, how emotional of a story would that be? It would be fantastic. And it would incorporate, like you're talking about, mentor-mentee, there being these complex relationships across generations. And it's still talking about there being oppression. And then, of course, we can talk about worlds where there's not. You can have worlds where there's magic and dragons and everybody's equal and everybody is treated exactly the same as far as with what they're able to do, what the law permits, all those sorts of things. So it's really about like who's skilled and they're learning cool skills, and the person they're learning a cool skill from is a lady. Yeah, that'd be great. I think the book, The Art of Prophecy, if you haven't checked that one out, Taylor, The Art of Prophecy has a really awesome mentor who is a woman. She is a mentor to a young man. However, she's an awesome mentor character. But anyway, I really appreciate your comment. I think there was so much there that was really interesting. Similarly, the next comment says, I just want to see more female characters that have positive relationships with their parents. Most of them don't have parents, or their parents are abusive or absent. Supportive, attentive parents exist. And then someone said, I second this. And the reason I'm kind of grouping these together is just because they both are related to there being some kind of connection to likely an older character. Obviously, if they're parents, they're most definitely older. But they're just being some kind of mentor-like individual in their lives, parental-like individual. And I'm not, like a lot of these things, I'm not opposed to exploring there being absent parents, abusive parents, and seeing how that affects a person, or parents that loved their child, but they still made mistakes that have affected the child. That's a lot of people's situations. But yeah, we so rarely see characters with parents that, I think this is across the board, whether it's no matter the gender of the character, just parents in general would be nice to see. I think there should be less of equating strength in female characters to masculinity. There are a lot of ways to be strong. This is what I came to say. I second this. Also less not like the other girls' characters. So obviously this is an exchange between a few different individuals. And the not like other girls, I think, is dying down because it got so bad for a while. And it often was in relation to relationships where a character would be like, I love you because you're not like other girls. And you're like, that's the only reason, though? I mean, there's a lot of women that exist, and there are certainly some that I'm kind of like, and what do you think of my friends? And anyway, we're just really tired of that. And yeah, I agree. And I'm glad that I don't think we see as much of it. Allie says, more friendships with male characters that are normalized and don't always end in romance. And always more healthy female-female friendships. Happy to see the awful trend of women hate each other finally dying down in media. Basically, happy, healthy friendships all around. Yeah, I agree. I think that Skyward by Brandon Sanderson actually has a really great relationship, a friendship between a girl and a boy, and then she has friendships with other people as well. Ironically, as much as I love Mistborn, touching on some things that I think are pretty valid criticisms, you see hardly any other women in Mistborn, and when you do, Vin's immediately like, I don't trust them. But I don't think she distrusts them because they're women. I think it's kind of just like, I trust no one, which is why I think it doesn't bother me quite as much, because a big thing for her is just learning to trust people. However, there are so few female characters in that series besides Vin that I think, Tindwell's there, and she's a very complex character. But anyway, I think that there could definitely still be more friendships with two girls and girls with guys. Just friendships, right? I think friendships in general. We could use a lot more of those in stories. And then also less of describing every female character's chests in detail. Although this is usually older books, it still feels like it warrants a mention. Yeah, I think maybe what we can say is, please don't bring this back. I think that's fair. Next up, Mel says, female main characters who are allowed to be weak. There is such a trend of strong female character and down with the patriarchy. Female main characters are not allowed to be emotionally vulnerable and cry. Sometimes strength can come from overcoming weakness and sadness, and books should showcase that more. Sorry for double posting. Totally fine to post more than once, especially if you have multiple things to say, obviously. But I think another thing to add to what you're saying about like vulnerability and weakness is that if it's a lot of what I've been saying, so I'm a little bit on repeat. If the reason the character feels they cannot show vulnerability or weakness is tied in some fashion to their past, I'll use the example from Avatar. It's not a female character, it's a boy, Zuko. I have just started watching this series for the first time in my entire life. I haven't just started. I've been watching it, and I have, on my side channel, Full Meta Analysis, I've been doing reactions to it. But most of you know the characters, and I won't give spoilers, but there is a character named Zuko who feels that he cannot show any vulnerabilities or any weakness, and that reasoning is explored. So if we do the same thing with female characters, which I know has been done before, but I feel with what you're describing is that we have these characters that are, I'm strong because literally I can beat people up and I have no emotions other than anger and rage. That's not strength. And if we're going to have a character that's like that, why are they like that? I'm always open to exploring the why. And I think that's where a lot of us get frustrated. It's the same thing with any trope. Fae, for example. Okay, yeah, we've seen a lot of Fae stories, but if you give us a really amazing book with really interesting characters and a really fascinating plot and a amazing, unique, creative world, and there's Fae that happen to be in it, okay, so there's Fae. Yeah, we've seen them before, but everything else was amazing, so why does it matter if we've seen it before? Most of us are, I think anyway, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of readers, that's the whole distinction between tropes and cliches. It's just such a cliche to have the quote-unquote strong female character, like you mentioned, and that strength is evidently just because she doesn't really cry or show that she's ever sad. And also, it can actually be a strength to show vulnerability, because there's a reason we think we can't cry, or there's a reason we think we can't show sadness. It's actually a form of trying to protect ourselves. So when you can open that and show that you have these other emotions, and that puts you at risk of being hurt even more, that's pretty commendable, I think. And I say that as somebody who hates crying in front of other people. I refuse. I hate it. I really shut it off as much as possible. Sometimes I can't help it. I both simultaneously cry all the time and never cry, meaning if I see like some really, I don't know, sweet like somebody comes home and it's been years and their dog gets all excited and makes cute noises and the dog is like whimpering and stuff, I'm just like, no, and it's like a little tear, you know? But as far as sobbing, I'm just like, nope, I don't want to do it. It gives me a headache. I don't want anybody to see me like this. So pretty much nobody ever does. And it's usually those kinds, like in relation to really serious stuff, like my father passing away and things like that. I'm just like, nope, shut off. My grandma, when she passed away, she was about to die. And my mom had the phone and had me on speaker and I was talking to my grandma. And that was just like, man, that was really difficult. But then I just was like, okay. And then I'm just like, let's move on with my day now. And so I'm admitting that it is really difficult for me to want to show that. And I think that's true for a lot of characters. So let's see those things in characters. Let's explore like that as opposed to just like, I don't even feel the feelings that would make me want to cry. That's what I'm trying to get across, if that wasn't clear. And then, Mel, your other comment was female main characters who the male main characters aren't romantically interested in. I am sick of reading stories where all the men are all inexplicably in love with the female main character. And I am a female myself. For once, I want to see her rejected by the guy instead of having to choose between multiple men or see them all be platonic friends. Nothing more. I am also sick of the overly beautiful woman and would like to see some plainer ones where appearance is not key to their personality. I'm not going to expand on this, not because I disagree, but because I agree. I just don't think there was much else for me to add to that. But hopefully that doesn't come across like I don't value what you just said. I do. Weaver says, less women who find themselves in a situation where a skill in weaponry or magic are necessary to complete the story, but it's okay because she just so happens to be proficient in that skill that she never knew she had. And then more, women like Kerrigan from Green Rider, she had no business being on that journey, and it showed. She had struggles. We could see her learn skills to survive, etc. along the way. It made for better character growth and a more realistic adventure. I've read the first book in Green Rider. I really need to keep going. And I completely agree about that character. And I also really liked her when you learned about her personality and her standing up for people, even when it put her reputation and put her future at risk. She was willing to stand up for what she thought was right. However, that didn't mean she was good at everything, which I really appreciated. Now getting to the comments from the community tab. So big thank you to all of my patrons for all of those really thoughtful responses. And now on to community tab. And like I said before, I'm going to try and get to ones where maybe there are not a lot of similar things expressed, just so we can get through as many concepts as possible. So first, I'm going to start saying women instead of female main characters because that's kind of long. I want more women who listen to others around them and really acknowledge that they don't know everything and actually could use some help. That is such a great point. There are certain characters that are initially the I have to do everything myself kind of characters, and then they learn to accept help. They learn they can't do everything on their own, and I really appreciate that. I also appreciate when the character is already aware of that and they recognize, like, I can't do this on my own. But we do see so often the character that never wants to ask for help, that never wants to rely on anybody. And then if there is anybody, it's their male love interest who's the bad boy, like we were talking about before. Or that's the only person they'll ever go to, and they never learn to go to their friends, or they never learn to go to a mentor, or just a person who might know what they're talking about. So completely agree. Less busting us in the head with how much of a feminist the female character is, but in reality her whole personality is attached to her love interest. Here's what I would love to see. First off, love this comment. Because, yeah, there are some books. Subtlety is nice, you know. You can have characters that stand up for people and who believe, like, hey, if you're a boy and you like pink, who cares? If you're a girl and you like mud, who cares? I'm just taking, like, the most basic of, like, stereotypes about men and women. But the point is, if you have a character that's like, whatever, live how you want to live, be who you are, don't harm other people, try to learn how to become a better person, great. As opposed to being like, did you know women are oppressed? Women are oppressed, and I don't stand for it. I don't stand for it. By the way, I don't stand for it. You're just like, oh my gosh, I get it. I know you don't. And then all of a sudden, like they're saying, the fella comes around. They're like, but anything you want, that's fine. However, I would love to see a struggle in certain characters who they believe in this idea that I don't want to be this person who crumbles the second there's a guy around, because again, we're talking about ladies as the main characters, and in this example, it's a guy who is the love interest, and that's usually the dynamic as far as the, like, I submit to you. I think it'd be really interesting to find a character who does fall in love, but then has to ask themselves the question of, well, am I... that they've had it built into their head that to fall in love and to be compromising, they get that mixed up with the idea that that's somehow being submissive and having no agency. So they have to ask themselves, like, is that what's happening to me? Because maybe they've seen it before, or maybe because we're kind of almost pushing back on the trend we've seen in fiction of that character that is constantly like, no, you don't, basically like, men are trash, meh. And then so this character's like, but I love one, so what do I do? I think that could be an interesting thing to explore, is I am having all these mushy-gushy feelings. I am thinking about this person all the time, even though I have really important other things that I should be thinking about. Does this make me stupid? And they have to ask themselves those questions. And I think that's realistic in real life, because oftentimes we fall in love not outside of the rest of life. We have school, like, if you're in, like, I met my husband when we were in college, so I had finals, I worked through school, so I had work, and I would still try to find time to drive out to see my dad, and when I could, I'd hang out with my mom. I lived at home with my mom, but we didn't get to see each other because we were constantly crossing paths, so it's like, I want to make sure I spend time with my mom. And then, what do you know, I fell in love through all of that, so then there's the balancing act of, okay, I don't want to sacrifice school time to be with, at the time, obviously, my boyfriend, but, like, I also really need to practice my violin because I have my jury coming up. That's what they were called. Not like jury duty. I have this coming up and I really need to practice, but also I haven't seen Sean all week. And so am I just like a flaky dumb girl? Because those sorts of things are things people think about, of the, am I not spending enough time with my friends anymore? Am I not spending enough time? And then I think you could feel that in a character in a story, but so often it doesn't go that way. It's just either I'm a strong lady, except for in this case I am not because this guy's hot, or I don't need any man and to fall in love is for stupid women. Why can't people be more nuanced in stories? Since the stabby female main character is trending, I'd love to see more negative character arcs. I love this comment. I'd love to see the hero everyone loves slowly descend into evil or madness, doing what she thinks is right. I don't have anything to contribute other than someone write that story. I would love to see it. And I know that there have been some stories that are written kind of that way. It's a hard thing to write, though, because when you write characters like that, if it's done poorly, then throughout the story, you're just like, okay, but this character's clearly evil, or it feels rushed, like one event will happen and suddenly a character you've been building up for seasons and seasons just becomes awful, because that's how madness works, right? You know, if it's not done well, it's very frustrating, but if it's done really well, then you, the entire time as the reader, you feel like all the side characters in the story who were once enthralled by this character and their reasons for doing what they're doing, and you used to agree with them, but you're like, I think we're going too far now. And then you're like, okay, but is this just nuance? Is this just a character flaw? Or are we starting to see patterns? And you question the whole time. By the end, you're like, I think they were the villain. That would be great. I feel like I got way too excited about that prompt. So thanks, because I really like that idea. Something I want to see more of is different types of strength. I think sometimes writers get bogged down in having female characters be one type of strong, a powerful fighter, a leader, etc. I'd love to see more gentle forms of strength as well, a quiet healer, a loving daughter, etc. Don't be afraid to write soft female characters. This is similar to what we were talking about before, but I wanted to mention it because I really appreciate the examples that you gave of the girl can still be the healer in the group, and she can be this really loving daughter, and I think those examples are fantastic because I am trying to remember the last time I saw that kind of a character. Because we saw this character type, one, we see it all the time in gaming, like RPGs. A lot of healers are the girl characters. But we don't see that in stories as much anymore, in books, I should say, because I think we're trying to push back on the character types that we saw before. and thus we have gone away from showing characters in those roles. I think we're almost afraid that it's regressive in some fashion, but it all comes down to the complexity and how you write the characters. By the way, can I just say, Yuna is like such a good character from Final Fantasy X, since I mentioned RPGs. She's the best. She's so sweet and so lovely. She's maybe a little naive at first, tying back to our previous comment, and then she grows, and she's resilient, and she perseveres, and she's just great. She's so nice. Anyway, I would like to see more seasoned female characters that have layers to them. I want to see gritty moms who know what it's like to sacrifice for their family, and play bigger roles. And then someone else said more mothers as main characters. I recently read a book where a mom was the MC, and seeing her love for her children and how it drove her decisions was amazing. So I really like that those were back to back. And yes, I agree. I would like to see more mothers and fathers as the main characters. And I actually think maybe it's possible I'm completely incorrect about this, but I actually think we see more often mother main characters than father main characters. And I actually think that's tied to, sort of in a weird way, us kind of deciding women are inevitably going to be mothers, but we see women in that role even before they have children. And then in stories, if we do get a parental character, it's usually a woman. The fact that we don't see it in men as often, I think, is kind of sad, because there's a lot of men who really love their children and who love being fathers, or who really want to be fathers. And I think that would be really nice to see in general. But all around, more parental figures. And what that's like, that would be so great. I know anytime I have friends who are moms and they read a fantasy story, because this is usually in fantasy that we're talking about, they read a fantasy story where there is a mother main character, it means so much to them. So I agree that we need to see more of that. And I imagine the same can be said for a lot of men who are fathers. I'm sure they would love to see that reflected. My biggest one would have to be including women in their late 20s onwards as main characters. It builds a depth and a realism to their actions. Plus, women don't disappear after 20. We can have adventures at 30 too. And I know we talked about the concept of having older characters, but I just really appreciated the additional element that you don't stop existing or being interesting once you're no longer in your 20s. I do think there's something to be said of people who are older when they're older than their 20s. I don't mean older like we're all so old now, but when you're past your 20s, I think, of course, you have gone through a lot of the firsts in life, but it's still fun to read about the first, the character that's falling in love, or the character that's discovering how the world really is, or the character that has the energy to fight against, the evil Dark Lord. And then, though, there are certain things that occur more often for certain age groups that it's just like, okay, but that's still an interesting thing to explore. And then people who are younger can still find value in those stories and find those stories interesting. So how about we explore those? I need more Amina al-Sarafi characters. An awesome mom who has a past but protects her family. She also listens to her crew. Found family. She is single in the beginning and is single at the end. She is older, has flaws and struggles. I need more. Yeah, I really liked the character, and I wanted to read these two close together because I think that book is such a great example of what was being said in the comment right before. More positive and upbeat characters, like Tress. I think making your female dark and edgy to add depth tends to backfire. Same with making them overly snarky and confrontational. I suppose this goes for guys too. I agree. I would have added that if you had not, that the idea that snarkiness and being cynical is somehow... It's like there's a comedian that talks about how they are attracted to depressed women because they always think that there must be something else there, and then they start dating them and they realize that there's not. I don't know why it's like artists. We're like, oh, well, the best artists are the ones that are the most miserable and depressed. And you're like, that's not necessarily true. So I think that is unfortunately prevalent in fiction, and I agree that it'd be nice to get a break from that. Some authors seem to think that the only trauma women experience is assault. Let's have a lot less of that. I think that it is important that we have stories where we are very careful about exploring that, but that we have stories also where it does not occur. For it to feel like every time you pick up a story, you're going to have to read about that, especially if you yourself have experienced it, if you've almost experienced it, you know people who have experienced it, and you are now looking to read a story that's a fun adventure, and that's there, and it feels like every time you turn around, that's there. We need to have stories where that's not always the situation. However, I think it's important to also have the other area, because it is a realistic part of being a person. A lot of people do experience this, and it can be, I know it sounds strange, it all depends on the individual, but it can be cathartic and helpful to see a character still be resilient, strong, kind, compassionate, funny, silly, to still have life beyond that event, because it reminds them that they're not defined by that. That's why it's so important, I think, to be very careful about how that's written. I think if it happens in, for example, a first book in a series, and then it gets explored later, maybe you won't see it in that first book. I was saying this about a different thing as well. You won't see it in the first book maybe, but to explore the long-term effects, I think that can be really powerful. I get very frustrated, though, when it happens, and then the character never thinks about it again. Because in that instance, it's like, okay, so can you not imagine women existing without that happening? It must happen, but then what, we just carry on, and again, this doesn't just happen to women, but it's like, oh, well, that horrible thing happened, but I never think about it ever. That's not realistic. And it's like, why would you have the reader read about that for no reason? It's very aggravating when that occurs. So I don't disagree, though, that we need more stories where we can read and not see that. I think we are definitely coming away from it. But I think I might just elaborate and extend this to say that when we do see it, I want there to be a lot of care with it. I need more women who are the monsters, villains, aliens, and beasts. I think that would be a lot of fun. I don't know if I have a whole lot else to add. I really want them as the main strategists of the story, and calm and cold, not hot-headed, who insults everyone around them. Let's accept the fact that average women tend to be weaker than guys, and in every book we don't want them to be a bodybuilder. I would love to see them with composure, mastermind, mad scientist, courageous, but have weakness too, and knows and accepts that. And I think this is just similar to a lot of what we were saying before, is that we just want to see all different kinds of character types and not put them into boxes. Would love to see a not-so-strong character become strong over time in a series, emotionally and physically. Look, if you want to have a good cry, just have a cry. And then loved your romance one. Oh, thank you. I thought you were just elaborating. But yeah, I think we got into this, that the whole concept of crying, there's a lot to that. But I wanted to still single this comment out, as I really like the idea of them becoming stronger over time, emotionally and physically. So you have that character who needs to train. We see training sequences so often in stories for male characters. We see them get stronger, we see them level up, and I think for some reason we either have the girls be like, they're soft and they stay soft, or they're awesome, they've always been awesome, and then there's a third option, which is they were soft and then now they're awesome, but we don't explore that in between. We don't see the struggle. And maybe it's tied to what the other comment earlier about, like, we can't imagine women smelling and working out and wanting to build muscle and get stronger and getting hit and beat and having injuries and having to come up. Maybe we don't want to think about that or something, but we, like, for some reason, when guys in stories are going through that, it's like, if you're attracted to guys, then, like, that's kind of an attractive thing to, like, see them getting stronger. Or if you are not attracted to guys, but you're a guy or something, and you're like, yeah, there's, like, something cool. But I don't know, am I the only one that's thinking about that training sequence in Mulan, and she's getting stronger, and it's awesome? It's not like we need to spend tons of time on it, but there's, like, the fun, like, yeah, come on, you can do it. This is why Mulan was great. I loved that movie as a kid. It was my favorite. And she's awesome. And she starts, man, this is why she's such a great character still. She starts in a certain place. She grows. She loves her family. She has parents. It's a big part of her motivations. She's a very strong-willed person, but she's not physically strong yet, so she has to work at it. And then she kind of has to, like, be like the guys, you know. I know there's that element. Not everybody loves the woman has to be disguised as a guy in order to show she's amazing. I think in that story, they gave you reasons why it's applicable to the plot. But anyway, I'm not going to go on and on and on about why Mulan is great. But I think it's great. Mulan's great. I feel like we need more Mulan types, you know? And she's not awful and mean to people. She's nice. Anyway, very specific, but I would love to see a female character in the role of the fun, quirky, wise old master that is secretly one of the most powerful people in existence. And then they give some examples. From what I've read so far, even when a book has a female protagonist, her wise teacher is still quite often male. And we touched on this before, but I just liked the inclusion of them being like fun and quirky, because that adds an extra additional specification, as you don't want just because I will say, I know I mentioned the Art of Prophecy, and you do get a mentor in that. They're not exactly fun. They're very rough around the edges. I've seen some things in life. I don't have patience anymore, kind of a character, but I think the sort of silly Iroh type that you mentioned, that would be a lot of fun to see. I completely agree. More ladies that are healers, librarians, merchants, or have specialized skills that aren't centered around stabbing people or disrespecting all the people around them. Agreed. No more declaring a woman a strong female character by making her hate feminine-coded things. You can be awesome and wear a pink dress, which just makes me think of this. I completely agree with you. You can be awesome and wear a pretty pink dress. There's this thing I saw. I don't know who the person is. I don't care. But she was just like, I'm not a feminist. I wear dresses. Or I'm not a feminist. I like pink. And I'm just like, some feminists like pink and wear dresses too. It just is very similar to what you were saying. And yeah, the idea that we're all supposed to exist in these certain boxes, kind of tying everything full circle. No, people are more complex than that. Somehow getting a skin-tight and perfectly form-fitting outfit that another character somehow guessed their size perfectly. What a very specific thing to mention. But yeah, there are so many times where a character will be like, I'll get you some clothes. And they show up and it like fits amazing. And I'm like, okay, I can go to the store and you have jeans that come in so many sizes and so many different cuts, and I can try so many of them on. And I'm like, all these suck. None of them fit. And somehow in fantasy lands, it's like a superpower. I don't know how they do it. Good mothers should be used more often. They can model healthy relationships, boundaries, sacrifice, and self-improvement. Moms can go from being gentle to steely in the blink of an eye. They aren't perfect characters, which is ultimately more relatable for the reader. A seasoned mom would have a relatively good head on her shoulders, and authors could focus on world-building, plot, and character development instead of drama. I know we talked about the inclusion of more parents in stories, but I really liked the details that you provided here with, one, why mother characters are so fascinating and the ways in which they can be really, really relatable. That's relatable not just for moms, but for anybody with a relationship with their mother. I think that they would really enjoy seeing that. Kind of jumping off a different comment I saw, but more villainous, monstrous female characters who are not villainous monsters because they got their heart broken. On a different note, this might not necessarily apply to female characters, or maybe it does, but I would just love to see a female character start off the book as single and then end the book or series as single. They don't need to be asexual, but I just feel like I never see a female character stay single. Women like to have fun and not be in committed relationships too. And I think the fact that you put two at the end, maybe there's this idea that men in stories can exist and have interesting, compelling plots centered around their character that don't necessarily include falling in love. And it feels like women have to have that element in there. And perhaps I'm reading too much into the two part of that statement. But yeah, I think that somebody using the example of Amina al-Sarafi was a good one, as there are plenty of characters whose plots don't revolve around them falling in love. And then as far as the villainous monstrous without it being because they got their heart broken, I do think that would be interesting to explore. Do they have a curse put on them? Do they transform into that because of the magic of their world? I mean, what's the reason besides just basically like heartless, off with their heads? I fell in love, something sad happened, now I hate everybody. Would like to see more butch female characters. It'd also be interesting to see specifically a butch GNC female character who presents and dresses more masculine but still can't fight. But speaking of weapons, I do love me some warrior ladies, but swords, daggers, and bows aren't the only weapons out there. Let her wield an axe, spear, javelin, crossbow, etc. I'd also love to see more female characters written in archetypes traditionally associated with male characters like the swashbuckler, the mad scientist, the trickster, the wise old wizard, etc. And in general, give them depth and complexity and write them like people. And I really like this comment for a number of reasons. One, I do think that you get the character that is utilizing stereotypically masculine traits, as we've gone over. It doesn't necessarily mean that literally those can only be applied to men, but I think we all know what we're talking about. Yet, those women are still show up as stereotypically feminine. And it would be kind of cool to have more of the, there's a certain character in Game of Thrones, that she is, well, in this case, she's not the character that presents a certain way but then can't fight. She can fight, but she's not the most beautiful woman in all the land, on top of also being able to fight. So there's Brienne of Tarth is who I'm referring to. I'm sure you put that together. But yeah, I think it would be awesome to see more characters that have a certain look because they like that look for themselves, because they like to dress a certain way, and it has nothing to do with their ability to fight. And then also I like the idea of there being other weapons and just the other types. Because you're right that when we do see them fulfilling certain roles that aren't generally associated with female characters, it is almost always the warrior character, but we don't often see the swashbuckler, the mad scientist, the trickster, and that would be fun. I think we get a little bit of the trickster because you kind of get the street thief character from time to time, but I'm trying to think if we've seen, I think someone else mentioned merchant, which you see here and there. The Stardust Thief is an example of a character that has that, but I don't really think of swashbuckler very often. Amina kind of has that again. She really ticks a lot of the boxes for being different. And then I thought it'd be great to end this with this comment because it's succinct and it gets the point across. Out with strong female characters, in with well-rounded female characters, because yes, a character can be a strong character and well-rounded. And I think that is what a lot of us feel is lacking a little bit, is that they are strong, but that's their whole identity. And what a lot of us are really craving, and I think this encompasses so much of what we've discussed, is we just want to see more nuance, real people, different experiences than what we're given over and over and over again, different character types, personality traits. We just want to see something new, but that is still a reflection of us. But anyway, thanks so much for all of your comments. Thank you so much for continuing to participate in these. I really enjoy doing this. I really enjoy getting to hear your thoughts on things, to feel like I get to actually respond a little bit more than just a brief, heart in the comments or reading your comment, but maybe I don't get the chance to reply. I just feel like it allows me to see your perspective on things and feel like there's a little bit more of a connection in that way. So thank you so much. A reminder that the prompt for male main characters is officially up when this goes up. So if you'd like to participate in that, you can leave a comment over on the community tab post. If you'd like to guarantee it gets read, I'll have my Patreon linked. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts if there's anything you'd like to add to any of these. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.